Welcome to the AA Podcast, our little corner of the web where we are not afraid to discuss tough questions like,
when did nutrition, health, movement, and stress management become alternative medicine?
Where we embrace challenges in all aspects of life to become healthier and stronger versions of ourselves.
And where food and movement are the best kinds of medicine, and cooking meals at home is a revolutionary act.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the AA Podcast. This is Ashley Olson.
And I'm Andrea Crane.
We are coming to you with part one of a series. I believe you said 4 or 5? 3? 4.
That's a really good question, and we never know how much we have to say about all this stuff. And can I just tell you, I love the countdown. It makes me feel famous.
So on our platform that we record on, it has a little countdown, so it makes us feel very official.
Yeah. We are official.
So this series has been one in the making for a long time, and one that's been asked for a very long time, so highly requested. And we are going to do our best to dive into these areas of hormones, specifically female hormones, to try to help you guys and us as we're both entering different phases of this era, to help us navigate these issues and complications and questions.
Ashley, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping in here and we're going to do our Bible verse, but I was wondering, I'm totally springing this on you. You had no idea this was coming. So one of my very, very sweet friends sent in a question about low blood sugar and sleep. So is that something that we could get to?
Oh, the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she emailed it, right?
Yes. Well, she texted me also. Maybe we could do that at the end.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Just remind me.
Okay, Chris, just hang in there, girl. Hang in there.
But before we get into any of that, let's do our Bible verse for the week. And mine is coming from Psalm 62:7. And it says, "My salvation and my honor depend on God. He is my mighty rock, my refuge."
Oof. Psalms must have been on the brain this week because mine is also coming from Psalm 27:13. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living.
Good ones.
That is from my personal psalm. You all may partake if you need to.
The Psalms are so amazing. If you guys ever want to do like a month-long reading, which you're like, the Psalms has hundreds of chapters. How good
there are lots to choose from.
Do 1 and then add 30. So the first day you do 1 and then 31 and then 61 and then 91 and then 121. You do all of those. So you do 30. 30 chapters, and then every day it perfectly fits in a 31 months.
A 31-day month?
Yep.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's amazing.
With Psalms 119, which is ginormous, you can actually split it up. And I think you can do 30 verses at a time. Don't quote me on that, but you can break it up and it helps.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
For you guys.
Well, okay. I mean, we're done.
We don't just have health and fitness.
Mic drop. No, we're done today.
And then you can, and then Proverbs has 31 chapters, so you just pair Proverbs with that day.
Oh gosh, Ashley, you're full of wisdom today. Full of it. And Ashley is always full of something, and it just happens to be wisdom today. So
but
sometimes it's not wisdom. Sometimes we're both full of crapola, but today is not that day. So,
all right, Andrea. Well, do you want to get to your friend's question first?
Oh, sure. So this was an amazing question, actually, and this is my dear sweet friend Chris. Chris, shout out to you. She's one of my OGs in functional medicine. She's like super smart and asks great questions. And she is actually the one that came up with the Andrea Crane Joy Free Eating Plan. That's what she and her family called my diet plan that I made for her. It was the Andrea Crane Joy Free Eating Plan. And
Oh,
yeah, so she and her friends have been calling it, or her kids have been calling it that forever. But Chris asked me, let's see, what is considered a low enough blood sugar to wake you up in the middle of the night? So remember, we talked about when you are waking at like 2 to 3 in the morning, and I talked about the juice trick because it
yes.
could be your body's blood sugar dropping low enough that that your that part of your brain that keeps you online, that you don't have to think about, like blood pressure, your heart rate, all of those
Mhm.
automatic things. um, so she asked how low is low enough, because she's
Okay.
got a glucose monitor and she wants to monitor that, and see if there's maybe some hypoglycemia. I think that's probably where she's going with this. But yeah, that's such a great question. And so yeah, it's going to be around like 65 to 70, because the blood glucose or blood sugar is a real Goldilocks kind of measurement, right? If it's too low, you can die. If it's too high, you can eventually die. Now, too low is much, much worse than too high. In fact, you can get in trouble real quick if it's too low.
Mhm.
Like coma, death kind of thing. So 65, 70, brain starts to get super nervous about having enough glucose to actually fuel the brain. And so what happens is that will trigger your adrenaline, and you'll get this burst of adrenaline. Now, what the adrenaline does, the side effect is it wakes you up. But what really the adrenaline is doing is it's triggering a glycogen breakdown. So in the liver, you store glucose molecules as glycogen, and your body can get to it easily. And so, what that hit of adrenaline does is it signals to the liver, you got to get some glucose out here like ASAP. And so it triggers that glycogen breakdown. Okay. Um, and then, yeah, you get a quick hit of glucose at that point. And also, I recommend that supplemental hit of glucose with the juice by the bedside. Not too much, but just a little bit, and go back to sleep. And that can be a real telltale thing, so that you might be having some hypoglycemic episodes, which is not great. Rounds of hypoglycemia has been shown to be related to more closely associated with death than the more elevated sustained levels of blood sugar. I mean, obviously diabetes is not great either, but hypoglycemia is more acutely dangerous. Does that make sense?
Yes. And so
Okay.
if somebody say the juice trick starts working,
Yeah.
then you go get checked out by your doctor.
Yep, I
And
absolutely would
then
do that.
and
Yeah, and
then they would help
protein.
you. Yes, protein.
Yes, protein throughout the day, because you want that slow release source of glucose.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you guys haven't figured out by now, protein is like the magic
Magic
nutrient,
macro. It's the magic
magic
macro.
macro. Y'all
Yes.
need to be eating it. I don't know
Yes.
why it's so hard for some of you to get that
I
brain.
know. I'm up to 150 grams a day.
Good job.
You're welcome, Ashley. You're welcome.
I
Yes,
am
you've been.
so proud of you.
Yeah, yeah. I preach about it, and I thought, I just need to make the jump from 120 to 150 and just
You
do it.
got to do it.
So, yep,
Yeah,
I've been
that's
doing it.
awesome. Good job.
Um.
All right, Andrea.
Okay.
So today we are
Hormones.
diving into
Mhm.
hormones.
Mhm.
So, ladies, get your pen and paper ready.
That's right.
We're going to be going over some amazing facts and things that will help you, whether or not you're in this stage of life or not.
Mhm.
So, we're going to start today with this episode one of however many. We're going
of,
to be
of a
talking
bunch.
about progesterone.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we get into that, so last week's episode, we did a high level overview of a
Mhm.
lot of frequently asked questions. So a lot of this is going to be a little bit of a review, but why don't we first discuss what are the primary uh, hormones that play a crucial role in female health?
Sure. And this is, oh my gosh, this is such a loaded question because I always tell my patients, like, as women, we are so insanely complex. By comparison, men men are a lot easier to fix than women are. We've got crazy hormones interacting with each other. They're all over the place. They're affecting one another. They're affected by stress. They're affected by thyroid. They're affected by all these things. So I just want to, before we even get into the discussion, I just want to put this caveat out there. Please, if you're having issues, please not only get your hormones checked, but get your thyroid checked. Do check in with yourself about your levels of stress, because that can all mimic and can impact hormone levels, right?
And
So,
I love this saying that you say all the time, I cannot out supplement sleep. If you do not have
yes.
good quality sleep,
Hmm.
everything that we're going to talk about today is
That's right.
pretty much just nothing.
Yeah, there are a lot of things you can't out supplement, you guys. You can't out supplement a bad diet. You can't out supplement a really crummy, toxic relationship. You can't
Mhm.
out supplement night shift. Sorry.
Mhm.
You just can't.
Yes.
Like, you can't out supplement crushing, soul sucking stress. Okay. So, anyway, so back to the hormones. What are the primary hormones that play a crucial role in women's health? First of all, progesterone, which we're going to do a deep dive into today. Then we've got estrogen, and she's the queen of female hormones. And then we have testosterone, which plays a bigger role than you might think. And we'll get into that in, at least in part three, part three of, we don't know how many. But then there's some little ancillary hormones that I wanted to just briefly touch on today. And the first one is called DHEA. And DHEA it stands for dehydroepiandrosterone. And what that is it's a precursor hormone. And this is the weird thing. It's really a cool molecule. I mean, I kind of in clinical practice, I kind of equate this to an adaptogen, and I use it for several different purposes. I use it in males and in females, and I'll use it topically or orally for different effects that I need. But I wanted to spend just a moment here talking about it, because in the body, it can actually be a precursor molecule. The body can turn it into testosterone, or it can then finish converting it to estrogen. So that's kind of weird. It could be an androgen like testosterone, or it could be an estrogen, or it can also function as a neurosteroid. So it readily crosses the blood-brain barrier. It's fat soluble, so it gets right into the brain, and it has some um, beneficial effects on the brain too. So anyway, DHEA, I use it like if I've got women who need localized sources of estrogen. So, for instance, we're not in the estrogen part, but we'll go into this further later. But for instance, vaginal atrophy, that's a huge problem, or painful intercourse, all part and parcel of the same issues. I will frequently use like a DHEA suppository, and that helps. So in that circumstance, it kind of functions like an estrogen, right? But in men who have low testosterone, and let's say that they're very young, let's say that they're in their 20s or 30s, and I don't want to get them started down on the road of testosterone replacement, right? Because they're way too young. Let's say that they want to have kids later on, that they still have fertility in front of them. I don't want to get them started on testosterone if I can help it, because that suppresses sperm production and blah blah blah. Uh, a whole litany of effects there. But I will frequently use oral DHEA, because their bodies will. A lot of times, I can get the clinical effect of their bodies converting it into testosterone, and we get back up into those beneficial ranges. So yeah, I mean, I use it for lots of different things in practice. It's a really cool steroid. hormone. And just so you know, hormones are steroids. Like that's the class, that's a structural organic class that they belong to because of their makeup. So then I wanted to talk about luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. So um, a lot of women will they'll come in and they will ask questions like, oh, based on my blood work, am I in menopause? So historically, if luteinizing hormone is high and follicle stimulating hormone is high, then you could say, oh yes, you are in menopause because your LH and FSH, they are sky high. Yes, that is a tell in the body that a woman may be going through menopause or in the late stages of perimenopause. But what these do in the premenopausal woman and perimenopausal woman is that they work together to mature and release an egg from the ovarian follicles, right? So there are these like little pouches that contain an egg, and as you probably know, females are born with the number of follicles and eggs that you're ever going to have in your entire life. You're born with them. Okay. So
So
there's no,
crazy.
isn't that weird? So there's no creating more. But LH and FSH work together. They're secreted by the pituitary in response to gonadotropin releasing hormone. And they work in tandem to mature and then release that egg from the follicle. And then yeah, so that's kind of what I wanted to say about those ancillary hormones. And now we can get right into progesterone.
That's awesome. So what is the role of progesterone, like especially in the female body, right? And why is
Mhm.
it important for our reproductive health?
Well, progesterone is critical. So, it, some of our listeners, if you've struggled with infertility, you no doubt are aware of how important progesterone is. So, one of its prime directives is to maintain pregnancy. In fact, the first uses of bioidentical compounded progesterone were really used in women who had sort of a chronicity to their miscarriages, right? They were just miscarrying over and over again. And so, how do you maintain that pregnancy? So, one of the ways that we can induce a body to maintain the pregnancy is by giving exogenous sources of progesterone. So that's how that was used. It will maintain among various stages of pregnancy, and the way that that works is the effect that progesterone has on the endometrial lining. And when I'm talking about endometrial lining, that's just the inside of the uterus. So if you think of the uterus as like this little pear shaped almost sac, it's like a little hollow organ, and the bottom of the, like if you flip the pear upside down, that's kind of how it's shaped. And then the bottom part, the skinny part, there's an opening there called the cervix. And so the cervix is like this donut shaped, and it literally looks like a donut. And then there's like a little line or a little hole in the middle, depending on if you've had children or not. And so that cervix opens into the uterus, and then if you can think of the uterus as like a balloon, that inside lining of the uterus is called the endometrium. And so what progesterone, the impact that progesterone has on the endometrium is that it either, in the course of a female cycle, it either prepares that lining for implantation or for shedding. Okay. And another cool thing that progesterone will do is that once an egg has implanted, it inhibits the body from further maturing another follicle, because you don't want to stimulate another menstrual cycle, right? Because you don't want to shed that lining that's got the implanted egg. You want to maintain that pregnancy. So yeah, it inhibits further ovulation once a pregnancy has begun. So that's why higher levels of progesterone are really important. Now, another function is obviously it helps in the menstrual dance. I mean, there's this just crazy uh, cacophony. I mean, it's very well orchestrated, but if you look at it on a graph, like things are rising and falling, and they've got their own sort of rhythm to it. But the rhythm of progesterone definitely helps with that menstrual clock. And we kind of, stereotypically think of the menstrual clock as being like 28-day cycles, right? So progesterone helps to further that cycle and helps to regulate it. Now, it also is a potent contraceptive, which is weird, right? Because I've just told you that it maintains pregnancies, but it's also a contraceptive agent. So remember what happens once the egg implants. It inhibits further ovulation. Well, if you give supra or above physiological levels of progesterone, like if I give a woman, like in the form of a birth control pill, which I don't write for a lot of birth control pills, but sometimes they're warranted. But a progesterone only pill will then also inhibit further ovulation, and you can't get pregnant if you're not ovulating. Okay, so
Mhm.
that's how it would work in the form of contraception. There is one other way that it works with contraception. We have devices called IUDs, and this is just like a little implanted. It's a piece of metal. It's a piece of bent metal that a lot of times will be impregnated with progesterone. Now, what that does is you. So remember the cervix. It's got this little opening in the center of it, and so that little piece of metal has like something that flips out. So once it crosses through the middle of the donut, this little T will flip out so that it can't come back through. It's stuck there. All right. It's kind of like hanging a picture on the wall, where you put
Mhm.
those things through the drywall and then they flip out on the back
Yeah.
side. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how an IUD works. So anyway, often these things are impregnated with progesterone because the impact that it has just locally there is it thickens cervical mucus so that sperm can't get to the egg. So if they can't meet, then you never get fertilization of the egg. So those are the two ways that it works for contraception. And then let's see. Oh, the also so in well, particularly in perimenopausal women, when we're talking around the ages where we would start to see things like reproductive cancers, uterine cancers, all those can happen earlier, but normally it's not until that third, fourth, fifth decade of life, and so the progesterone will actually protect the uterus against some of the toxic effects of estrogen. So there are circumstances where estrogen can cause, well, cause is a harsh word there. Estrogen can contribute, there we go, can
There you go.
contribute to reproductive cancers. And what progesterone does is it sort of balances out that influence. So, we're going to talk a lot about balancing and influence when we're talking about progesterone and estrogen. They need to be in a balance with one another. And so that's one of the protective functions of progesterone. It protects the uterus against some of the effects of estrogen.
Okay.
Um, and then, oh gosh, and progesterone supports mood and sleep. So, uh, wow, if you are like on a hair trigger, if you are just, stark raving angry, if you are not sleeping in this perimenopausal fog, then progesterone that's your guy. So progesterone helps with mood and sleep. Also, it helps to thin. So I was talking about the impact of progesterone on that endometrial lining. It helps to thin the endometrial lining. All right. Estrogen thickens it up, which we'll get into more next week, but progesterone again balances estrogen so it thins it. Okay? So those are the primary functions, the physiological functions of progesterone.
Okay. That's a lot.
I
Like,
know, it's crazy.
it's not just a simple answer.
Yeah, no, hormones are never simple, they're crazy.
So we obviously see levels of progesterone fluctuating. How do
Yes.
they fluctuate through a menstrual cycle,
Mhm.
and what are the implications of these changes?
Well, so as I mentioned before, the one of the impacts of progesterone is that it will ready the endometrial lining either for shedding or implantation. And so you get that impact. So think about this. Think about when ovulation occurs, right? That's generally around day 14 in a 28-day cycle. Um, and again, this can give or take any number of days because everybody's different. But after ovulation happens, you've got an egg that's ready to roll, right? So it's past it's um, released from the ovary, and now it heads down the fallopian tube and it's going to head to the uterus, right? Now the progesterone is going to need to peak shortly after that. So right around I'd say day 17 through about 21, you get this peak of progesterone because again, we got to ready the uterine lining for implantation or for to get rid of it. And so that's where I like to check hormones is during that progesterone peak because I like to know now, estrogen also will have a little mini peak in there too, but again, we'll get to estrogen next week. But I know
Wait your
they're all
turn.
I know they're all so interconnected. That was really hard for Ashley and I to come up with like a good way of presenting this that would make sense. So hopefully this doesn't feel disjointed to the listeners to separate these out. But I just wanted to I just wanted to highlight each one of them and what they do because I feel like that really sheds light on why we would supplement with this or that or the other. So anyway, but that's how progesterone kind of cycles through. And there are some other waves that you'll get, some little elevations or depressions in progesterone levels, but the big one is during that luteal phase, and it will peak in order to prepare the endometrial lining.
Okay.
Okay.
So, uh, what are the common symptoms and health issues associated with low progesterone?
So yeah, that is a great question because there's a lot of perimenopausal women that have low progesterone. Now, I want to draw a distinction here, and I'm always educating my patients on this. So I check levels, right? You can check a level of and let's just talk estrogen and progesterone here for a second. So I've got estrogen, I've got progesterone. Now, I will check a level of both of those, and we may be in range for both of them. They like on the labs, they may look beautiful, but then I also check a ratio
Mm.
because even if they're both in range, you can still have one that is exerting more influence than it should. So if for instance, if there is a deficiency of progesterone, then estrogen is exerting more influence than it should. Does that make sense? So
If progesterone is what? Say it again.
low,
Okay.
then estrogen gets to party.
Okay. I see.
Yeah. So
And then
you've
if
probably
progesterone is high, then estrogen is
is not exerting as much influence as she should.
okay.
Yeah.
So
So
between the two, it's a hundred
uh-huh.
percent.
Yes, yes, and they have to balance out. Otherwise, even though like your progesterone, like your estrogen could be in the end of normal and your progesterone could be in the low end of normal. That's still going to give you an imbalance, right? So functional providers will look at the ratio and say, this is why you're still having symptoms. It's because estrogen is exerting too much influence. We need to get some progesterone on board. Okay.
Okay.
So, if you've ever heard of something called estrogen dominance, and that is all the rage right now,
Yes.
people are talking about estrogen dominance. So, I want you to think about this. It could either be because you have way too much estrogen, or it could be because you have way too little progesterone. Does that make sense?
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's not about suppressing necessarily the estrogen.
Yeah. So,
It's
there are
about,
two
like,
ways.
actually maybe adding
Yes.
in more
Ex
progesterone.
exactly. Yes, that's exactly it. So I always have two things that I could do if I've got this mismatch, right? I can either lower the estrogen or I can raise the progesterone because I
Okay.
need these two to meet at some place. And it depends on how old the woman is, and which one I will go after depends very much on age, and it depends on fertility goals, and it just depends on where we are in this whole menstrual cycle in her life. So, um, now, so let's talk about what a deficiency of progesterone looks like. It's going to look exactly like an estrogen dominant situation. So, we're going to be talking about irregular periods, and they can be closer together. So, estrogen causes bleeding.
So this is why your doctor's throwing you on birth control.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. So when girls are 15, 16, 17, and they're exposed to all of these xenoestrogens out there in the world, and again, we're talking about estrogen instead of progesterone, but that's okay. They they go to, yeah, it's almost impossible to separate the two. But yeah, yeah, right. So you've got all of these horrendous xenoestrogens that are out in the wild, like they are chemicals that are estrogen mimickers in our body, and we're exposed to them. You want to know a source for really, really potent xenoestrogen is receipt paper.
Oh, yes.
And when you use alcohol hand sanitizer, you are driving that stuff in from the receipt paper. So you grab your receipt on your way out of the store, and then you take a pump of the hand sanitizer. You are just driving that stuff right across your skin. So that,
So
yeah,
dirty hands, no receipts.
that's right. No hand washing. Oh my gosh, yeah. Edward Semmelweis just rolled over in his Swedish grave. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, so we can have irregular periods, all kinds of breakthrough bleeding, depression, aggression and anxiety, fatigue, inability to sleep, because remember, progesterone helps you sleep and it is calming. So whatever the
Mhm.
opposite of that is, so irritability, difficulty conceiving and maintaining a pregnancy, because again, progesterone helps to maintain and conceive. And you'll find that all of these symptoms get markedly worse before a cycle. So we're not just talking, run of the mill PMS, I'm a little grouchy. This is really rip roaring, I don't know if I could function in the world kind of
Mm,
PMS.
mhm.
Um, and did you know that that the conventional response to this raging PMS, instead of getting hormone levels checked in these young women, they'll slap a diagnosis on them called PMDD, or premenstrual dysphoria disorder, and they'll put you on an SSRI, which is an antidepressant, because that's the cause. What every woman has is a Prozac deficiency rather than a hormonal
And if
issue.
you haven't already, go listen to our cognitive health
Oh, thank you.
episode.
Yes. Very much so. Very much so. Also, progesterone deficiency or estrogen dominance can also result in migraine headaches. So
Mm,
that's, these hormonally associated migraines. I check a hormone level, because that's a really important to see where the balance is, or if we're off.
yeah, absolutely. So, so I guess when or progesterone is high, we'll get into that
Hmm.
more in the estrogen
Yeah.
episode. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there ever a time that where someone would have too much progesterone,
Mm.
and like what does that look like? And kind of going back to what I just asked, like with the
Mhm.
high progesterone, but what does that look like for somebody?
Yeah, so if it yes, theoretically you can have too much progesterone and get into like a progesterone dominant situation, but that is much, much, much less common
Hmm.
than too much estrogen or too little progesterone, right?
Right.
Same effect.
So would they consider that an estrogen deficiency more than a progesterone
Yes.
high? Okay.
That's a really that's a good way to look at it. Yes, it would most likely come about because physiological levels of estrogen are too low. Rather than it's very easy to get to an excessive level of estrogen just within the body. It's not as easy to get to an excessive level of progesterone. The body really won't do that.
Okay.
However, if someone is, let's say they're supplementing with with progesterone and they're having too much of it, um, that I yeah, I've seen that lead to some breast swelling and tenderness, and primarily after ovulation. So, women that have a lot of breast tenderness, this could potentially be the issue. Um, as right after they ovulate, as they're heading into the menstrual phase of their cycle, a lot, you know, some women will complain of breast tenderness, and that often is because there isn't enough estrogen, and so progesterone is exerting too much of an effect. Potentially, it's a little more complex than that, but that could potentially be a problem. Also, weight gain on
Mhm.
progesterone. And this, oh my gosh, when I mention this, when I'm writing prescriptions for progesterone and I mention, well, there is potentially, then women are just like, no, no, get that away from me. I don't want it. I don't want it. I will live with all the rest. I will live with these homicidal tendencies. I don't care. I don't want to put on any weight. I get it. I do. I get it. But um, if we balance you, if you truly need progesterone, then this is not going
Things
to
will
be an
actually
issue.
work how they're supposed to
Yes.
in the long run.
Yes.
Like it
Because,
might be a short-term gain.
yeah. And maybe you're gaining weight because you're not sleeping. So
Exactly.
let's get you sleeping
Because
with
your
some
progesterone's
progesterone.
too low.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So I do try to help my patients do their due diligence, and I like to, give informed consent on, hey, these are some of the things you can look for, but listen, we're going to start low, go slow. That's how I do almost everything when I'm especially manipulating hormones.
Yeah. I had something I was going to ask, but oh, so I guess how does a body produce too much progesterone, or
Well,
is it
y-
typically because of a birth control or
yes.
other? Yeah.
Yes, it is typically from some kind of exogenous source, or again, like you mentioned earlier, it could be because they have an estrogen deficiency,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
right? So you
Because they
get
both have
that.
to balance out.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
So, we're all about like lifestyle and trying to do things as
Yes.
naturally as possible, Andrea.
Crunchy babes. Yeah.
But so, we're going to definitely be talking about HRT, and we touched on it last episode. So definitely, if you haven't already
Mhm.
listened to that one, go check it out. Because she does talk about that quite a bit. But what are some of the lifestyle changes, dietary adjustments, or
Mm.
even supplements that can help
Yeah.
support healthy progesterone?
Yeah, so one of the ways, so there have been in the past, there have been topical forms of progesterone that you can get over the counter. And in fact, there was I think a sweet potato formulation. I think there was a sweet potato extract that was a, air quote, progesterone supplement.
Hmm.
Um, these things don't typically move the needle a lot. Um, I don't recall getting. a particularly robust clinical effect from these. So
Okay.
if ladies are like legit low in progesterone, we probably do need to go the bioidentical hormone route.
Okay.
Um, you can get synthetic hormone, you can get commercially produced bioidentical. I'll talk about that here in a second. But what I like to recommend and what I really like to prescribe is the bioidentical hormone that is compounded in a pharmacy. We know
Specifically
what
made
goes
for
in.
you.
Yep, yep, that they make it just for you, that they don't use pharmaceutic excipients that cause side effects. I've seen so many side effects. Anyway, we'll get into that in just a second. But one thing that you can do dietarily, now I really believe in this. Make sure that you have a diet that, one, you're getting enough zinc. Okay.
Hmm.
So you really need to make sure you're getting enough zinc. You really need to make sure that you are getting enough amino acids. So make sure that yes,
Protein.
protein. And you also, it's absolutely critical that you are getting enough good quality fats
Hmm.
because you cannot make a hormone without fats. It's in, remember, hormones are steroids, right? That's the class of compound that they come from. And so you have to get plenty of fats, good quality fats in your diet. Otherwise, your body can't make these things.
Yep. I
Okay.
actually had a client that she came to me when she was going through perimenopause, and
Mm,
she was already a stellar athlete. Like she
mm,
was doing everything correct, and she was getting that lower belly fat. And what we ended up
mm-hmm.
doing was we bumped her protein up a little bit more, nothing crazy, but then we really refined where her fats were coming from, and I
Yes.
even got her up higher.
Uh-huh.
She was eating around 35 to 40 grams max a day, and we ended up getting her up to like 70,
Oh, that's awesome.
72
Yeah.
a day. Her stomach fat went away,
Yep.
like she
Yep.
had that ab definition that
Mhm.
she had before. And she
Mhm.
was just mind blown because she's like, I have never eaten this much fat before. And
Yeah.
she was just programmed in her head that, well, more fat just means I am
Right.
fat.
Right.
But
No, and
your hormones literally thrive off of
yeah,
these
you
nutrients.
have to have them, and the bottom line is, if you're eating vegetable fats, like vegetable oils, those are inflammatory. They feed something called the arachidonic acid pathway. Those are omega 6s. Those are the inflammatory fats. And it's, you don't need to make it any more complex than that. I get that the biochemistry is more complex than that, but all you really need to know is that you are getting plenty of omega 6s just from incidental exposures. Like, I don't expect dietary perfection from anybody. I don't have dietary perfection, right?
No.
Like, I go out to eat to celebrate things with my family, and frequently, like, I have things cooked in vegetable oil. There's not much you can do about a lot of that. So anyway, but
It's
the
not what you do
majority.
occasionally, it's what you
Yes,
do consistently.
that's right. So the majority of the time, I'm trying to avoid those because I get plenty of omega 6 fats just from those incidental exposures. And they are enough, right? You have to have some omega 6s, but trust me, everybody's getting plenty and then some. So you
Hmm.
don't need to seek them out. In fact, you need to avoid them.
Yeah, agreed.
Also, I want to put a plug in there for fiber, because again, um, when we're talking about balance, so you can either make more progesterone or you can get rid of some of that estrogen if you've got too much. Okay. And fiber helps to get rid of estrogens. Okay. So
Okay.
we've got to make sure that we are getting plenty of dietary fiber. I always recommend that people get between 25 and 35 grams a day. That's like bottom line. You've got to get a lot of fiber, because if you don't, then those hormones, they will just keep, especially the estrogens, they will just keep circulating and having an impact, and we've got to get them out.
Yeah. And if we talked about it in a previous episode, I'm
Mm.
blanking on which one yet. It could have been one of the cognitive health ones, but if you're experiencing, bloating with adding in extra fiber, make
Yeah.
sure, like what Andrea says with everything, go low and slow, add it in
Mhm.
slowly. Maybe do a drizzle in your water the first day, and then, slowly increase that over the coming days and the weeks.
Yeah.
And that will help that bloating effect with
Yeah.
fiber.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also I like mag, and I like
Yes,
I
magnesium.
mean, I think everybody should be on magnesium, almost
Hmm.
without exception. And then also, just making sure that you're getting plenty of B vitamins. Chances are really good, and this is a whole nother can of worms. We could, ooh, I think this might already be on our show list for future, but MTHFR mutation,
Oh
the
yes,
methylene
yes.
tetrahydrofolate reductase,
Hmm.
this is a very, very common mutation. It's not some big mystery. It's a very common mutation. And so you can just throw some really good methylated B vitamins at this also, just to make sure.
Mm,
So that's
yeah,
that's also really good.
awesome. Yeah, that's definitely on our episodes list, so we'll get to
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and then the final thing that I wanted to mention were prescription formulations. So I got into this just a little bit, but finally I want to say, how do we supplement, if you are deficient in progesterone, how do you get there?
Hmm.
Well, okay, so there used to be a form called medroxyprogesterone. It was dispensed with a brand name of Provera, and that used to be that combination of, remember, the horse urine estrogen,
Oh
right? The
yeah.
pregnant
Hmm.
mare's urine. And then we had this synthetic form of progesterone called medroxyprogesterone. And those are not used so much in fact, hardly at all anymore, because, well, they shouldn't be. They're awful. But now you can get commercially available sources of bioidentical progesterone. They are cheaper than compounded progesterone, but here's what I'll tell you: your mileage may vary. Please, if you can't afford bioidentical compounded progesterone, or if you are just trying to save some money and think, well, I'll just try the cheap stuff first, okay, go ahead, but just know that if you get some significant side effects like headaches, I cannot tell you how many people have told me that they got terrible, terrible headaches on this stuff. Is it the bioidenticals? Yes, it is. But there's something in there, in that mass produced, and I don't know what it is, but it causes headaches in so many people. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you get headaches with this stuff, don't think that progesterone is not for you. Try some bioidentical compounded progesterone. I like to order a slow release formulation in the majority of my patients because it will last them through the entire night. So they take it at bedtime, it lasts them through the entire night in the slow release capsule, and they sleep like babies. So,
Wow.
yeah, I love to dispense it that way.
Awesome.
And that's all I got for today.
Well, I think this was an awesome overview of progesterone. And we're going to continue, like we said, this whole series, we're going to break down each one. Obviously, we touched a little bit on estrogen already
Oh,
today,
yeah.
but we'll probably touch on progesterone in the next weeks
Yep.
too. So,
Guaranteed.
I think that, as you'll learn, these hormones just have a perfect dance together. And
Mhm.
when they're all in symmetry, they work amazing.
Yeah.
But getting there is what is the
Yeah,
challenge.
that's the hard part,
Yeah.
for
So if
sure.
you have questions, or maybe you're dealing with something specific we haven't touched on, we would love to hear from you and get your questions and see if they would be a great fit for helping others as well. Because I know this
Mhm.
is the thing. We all think we're individual, and we are, but so many people have the same symptoms and issues and frustrations that we want to talk about it. I think it's been a
Yeah.
faux pas for so long that that we want to make sure that you are well informed and you feel like you're being heard, because you're not just crazy. Things are just going on that are making you feel crazy. So,
Yes,
and
hormones. You need
Andrea can probably
hormones. Oh
share
my
in
gosh.
next week's episode
Yes.
her own experience,
Whew.
because it was
Dude. Dude. It's
we were
like,
about
Lord
to have a come
Jesus,
to
come quickly.
Jesus.
Yes. It's like, this has to be the end of the world. This has to, yeah, I don't know what's going on. The body snatchers have come, and I don't know whose I was left with, but I don't like it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So we'll get into that next week. But as always, we appreciate you listening. And if you have enjoyed this episode or any of the other episodes, we would be honored if you shared it with your friends and family via text, email, or just a simple share on your Instagram or Facebooks. You can always tag us, and we would love to give you guys a shout out. So we will see you on the next episode.
Bye. The content provided in the AA podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only. The podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical advice.